All right, you guys. Well, welcome back to another episode of The Common Theory. I'm your host, Chris, always along with my man, Dallas. And today we're going to be having Mr. Bobby B. Fine along with us and good old David Ankylosaur with us today. And we are going to be continuing the series that we've had going on. And this is going to be our final one. And this is Your Building Control Wrong. And something that we kind of always jump into these episodes, you guys, and something I'd like to start incorporating in is we're going to be slowing down, kind of giving you guys an overview of what we're doing so it's a little bit easier to kind of follow along with us and kind of know like exactly what we're doing with these episodes. So I'm just going to kind of touch on our key points with you guys here real quick, and then we'll get to the intros and all that stuff. So with no further ado, with this overview, we're going to be starting with Aoness Street Urchin, and we're going to be touching on some very key points of what the deck does to gain advantages with red and green as a color scheme, which is very important overall with, well, just red and green. A lot of people aren't under the assumption that you could do that with that color. And we're going to kind of like break the ice and kind of show that it can. And then our next big point is going to be how it uses permanent base control to really hold board state control. I mean, it literally says it itself. And from there, we're going to be moving on to Malcolm and Breaches, which is our next big deck of the talking, the whole point of discussion here. And that deck specifically uses stack control with like counter spells and things along those lines. And then the next thing that deck does is it uses these pinging effects to outvalue its opponents, and that's kind of how it gains the advantage and really controls the board state. And last and not least, we're going to be discussing Carter Doom Scourge, and we're going to be kind of digging deep on some of the flaws that we believe that this archetype has, and maybe we could try to rectify them or even just kind of discuss of like what our views and things along those lines are with that deck. But with no further ado, I just wanted to, say hi to you guys and see how you've been. It's been a while since the four of us has been on together. And David, my man, how's it been? You have a YouTube now going.
Too. I just posted a new video actually. It's talking about some old school like pre-modern cards that you can run in CPDH. Um, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed working on uh, slapping these little videos together and making the most niche magic content possible. So, yeah, I've been doing well.
That's great to hear, man. I've been really excited about that. We'll definitely put all your links down below. Um, it's been really enjoyable. I really enjoyed the stickers video that you came out with, and that was oh, go for it.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad that people have been watching them and liking them. They've been a lot of fun to put together, and I've got a couple ideas for a few others as well. So keep an eye out. I'm gonna keep making them for the foreseeable future.
Awesome, awesome. That's great to hear. And Bobby, I know you were sick not too long ago, and I hear you coughing out there.
Mm.
How you doing, man? You feeling all right?
Yeah, I'm doing better. Recovering from a respiratory infection that took me out for a couple weeks at this point. So, but yeah, no, feeling better, getting ready. All the fun Sanctuary League and tournament stuff's upcoming, so I've been getting that stuff ready, and yeah, feeling good.
Yeah, fantastic to hear that, man. Glad that you're feeling much better now. And definitely, guys, if you're not already signed up for this league or this tournament, definitely going to be there. Like, I'm going to be there. I don't know about you guys, but I will definitely be participating in this event, and I'm very excited. And, spoiler alert, my daughter has asked me already 400 times to be able to play in this event as well. So she will be there as well.
Returning champ.
Yep, exactly, exactly. She'll be bringing new spice. She has a new deck she's been testing, so I'm excited to see how she does with it.
Awesome.
Nice.
But uh, last but not least, my man Dallas, bro. How you been, man? School been kicking your butt lately, or what?
It's been busy. A lot of projects and all that fun stuff for school, so been a bit busy with that. Haven't been able to get too many games in recently, but got a game in tonight, which was fun. Got a Gretchen win, you know how Gretchen be. But yeah, nothing
Of
crazy.
course.
How have you been, Chris?
Dude, the weather down here in Florida has been just kicking my ass. That's the nicest thing I could say. Every single day I've been coming home to just rain and thunder and lightning. I've essentially not been able to turn my computer on at all, pretty much. So yeah, it's been just pretty horrendous down here with the weather. So, but with that, glad to hear you guys are doing well. And David, let's actually kick this off with your Aoness Street Urchin list, man. Tell us about it. Really, I think, being in red green, I think one of the biggest points that I pretty sure it's going to be easy for you to make about your list is how are we drawing cards, man? How are we even gaining card advantage with a deck like this? It's red and green. You're not playing blue. So this deck is automatically bad, right? Like that's just like what people think. So let's kind of change that outlook and let us know what you got, my man.
Yeah. So advantage in this deck, um, and sort of like in the format in general when you're playing a control deck, it can be harder to come by than in like normal commander. We don't have access to things like wraths or like the powerful board wipes you get in EDH. But the way that I built Airness is I load up on cards that make multiple game objects and use them with Street Urchin and Airness combined to aid fractions of a card for the most important creatures in play. So whereas, for instance, like I've got something like a Brandywine Farm, which when it comes into play or leaves play, I get a food token, which means the card advantage that I'm getting there is using that as removal with Street Urchin and Aranus. I can trade a third of a real card for anything on the board, really. Anything that needs to get dealt with, I can trade just a little piece of a card for a real threat. And that's the primary way that I gain advantage. I'm running a few things like, there's a Reckless Impulse. There should probably be a Rens Resolve. Airness themselves also gives you card advantage by discarding lands or sacrificing lands and attacking and getting them back into play. So I'm especially with like the artifact lands in the deck, I can sacrifice those basically for free when I attack, bring it back into play, and turn those into removal spells. So those are a few ways that I get card advantage out of my deck.
I mean, it sounds like it's a very synergistic deck, just all within itself, right? It's like a self-contained grenade, as weird as that may sound.
Absolutely, yeah. The entire deck is built around the interaction between the two commanders, and if that gets disrupted, I don't want to say the deck falls apart, but it really hums when the two are going, and I can protect them and use them to take out the threats on the board. So that's how I gain control. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of like all of these decks are very commander dependent, right? I mean, our format typically is that. I think I don't know,
Sure.
Dallas, how do you feel about that with the commander dependency with decks along these lines?
I'd say Malcolm Breaches is less so than the other two. Just for today, in terms of the control game plan, at least, a lot of this deck's removal inherently comes from the command zone, so it's not playing as much removal in the 99. Carter has a lot of removal in the 99, but it's also very reliant on just using its commander to make sure it's not taking damage. Whereas Malcolm Breaches likes to have its commanders out, and they're good value engines, but basically a lot of your combo lines and your value pieces are more in the 99, and your commanders significantly make those value engines and removal pieces much better, but they're less reliant, but they're still obviously very strong. And yeah, there are not many decks in our format that aren't somewhat commander reliant, at least.
So something I wanted to ask you the question, David, because this is a big elephant in the room for me in Puzzle, is your deck specifically, I think, and maybe this may be a bit of a hot take, and I don't mean it to be though, the Monarch and Initiative are incredibly difficult for decks to hold on to. But I believe your deck specifically solves that problem. If someone tries to take it from you, you're going to look at them and be like, I have 4 food tokens. Do you really want to take this away from me? And in our last episode, Puzzle really did say a great phrase where he was just like, I hold up my mana. I have this inherent threat. I'm going to get the advantage no matter what. You could choose to try to take it from me, but at the end of the day, I have the ability to protect it.
Absolutely. Me and I just played a game, and I was running Aoness, and I kept the Monarch for 5, 6. Nobody took it
Forever.
from me.
Yeah.
Nobody took it from me. The entire time, I was able to both build up enough blockers and enough big things to keep people from attacking me, and also the threat of activation, really, from Aoness, just being able to anything down that looked at me funny and wanted to take my crown.
And one other thing I like about the initiative and the Monarch in this list is, Airness, we've talked about it at length, David. Airness Urchin puts a target on your head because nobody wants that sticking around. And you don't, once it's there, you lose a lot of bargaining power because no one's going to listen to, you can't make deals because you're just a threat to everyone. But with the Monarch and Initiative, I think that's one way that you can sort of, game things a little bit. Once you kind of have things, you can make deals with people hey, you can have the Monarch for this turn if you let me get it back, as long as you have a pretty solid control of it and you're comfortable doing that. I think it's one of the more interesting ways to kind of navigate the sometimes really hard political position you have playing Airness Urchin.
Absolutely, they're definitely a political tool, and like Bobby said, you can give it away if you need to, because it's not especially difficult to get it back or to bargain for it back. And if it's advantageous for somebody else to have it, so they're taking the heat and they're getting attacked and not you, that's just gravy for sure.
Yeah, you have the benefit, it's easy for you to protect, which also means it's very easy for you to get back too. So
yeah, I find that to be really interesting because that kind of just falls into the next part of our subject matter, right? And it's just the permanent base control. And just like you were saying earlier, David, all of these cards that I'm looking at, Emerald's Hatcher, Rapacious One, Patron of the Arts, all of these cards bring extra with them. So you said earlier, it's you're using a third of a card, and that's very prevalent in the list. Just looking at it as a whole, just all of these cards make 3 or 4 things, which is relatively absurd to think about how much fodder you have for the street urchin once you develop this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole shtick of the deck. Is I play a lot of things that make a lot of tokens or whatever it is, and those as opposed to something like a Doomblade, for instance, because 1-for-1 removal in multiplayer format is inherently card disadvantage, or it's at least it's virtual card disadvantage, which isn't to say that you shouldn't play any of it. It's a necessary evil, but the way I always think of it is I Doomblade somebody's creature. I traded one of my cards for one of my opponent's cards. There are 2 other opponents in the game. They got rid of a threat without using any of their resources, so they are virtually up a card. Mm-hmm. So with Airness, I can trade a little piece of a card, a third, a fourth a card, to deal with a threat and not lose as much advantage as opposed to the rest of the table. I'm not helping people out as much by dealing with threats that way from a card advantage standpoint.
I mean, that little incremental value has to go a long way, though. Like, just, Bobby, you were in the game with him the other night. Like, just that little tiny incremental. How does that even look when you're playing against it?
Yeah, I mean, David and I talked a lot, like during the game, plenty. There's lots of talking, and then afterwards, we talked a lot about that game in particular. Like, it just gets to a point where there's so like, if left alone, it just builds up, this mass of things it can chuck at every creature, and it can choose to be picky about what creatures it kills. It can kill everything and just start turning things sideways quick. You can play it different ways depending on what's going on, and kind of play it by ear. But like, eventually, you got to throw things at it and make them use their resources, or you're just deeper and deeper in the hole as the game goes on. Or you got to find ways to deal with Aoness and Street Urchin, but with how much it's ramping, it doesn't mind recasting Aoness for what, David? I think you cast it for like 11 when we were at RIW or something one time. Like, it was like it can do that and still have mana left over to activate Street Urchin. So you gotta like deal with it early, deal with it often, and if you don't, it's gonna bury you pretty quickly.
So it sounds like you guys really talk about the deck a lot, which is, obviously why you guys are both here about it, right? I have to ask this big question because I think this is a very important thing about the deck as a whole. Because if I look at this and I want to play it, is there any way you could help me understand when I could round the corner with this deck, right? Like, is there a way to know how to kind of make that curve into ending the game? Or is it just it's just fully board state dependent? There's no way you can help me learn that except for gameplay. Is there anything out there maybe you could kind of throw 2 cents at me with, or?
I'll jump in real quick.
Go ahead, Bobby. Yeah, go ahead.
You and I, like, the last game we played together, we talked. I think this was like one of the big topics we talked about afterwards. I know, like, I think you, Joe, and I were all kind of like talking about it. Like, there's a point where you have so much stuff. I mean, depending on the game, obviously. I wouldn't say there's like a set, like, oh yeah, you know when to turn the corner, because every game's different. It's gonna depend on what the other people are doing, because there are, against combat decks, if they don't have creatures in play, odds are good you're good to start, just going to town in combat and winning the game. Against certain combo decks, they can win out of nowhere, so you still have to keep shields up. You have to, be careful. So familiarizing yourself with what other people are doing is always going to be important, especially in the context of control. Like, you got to know what you're trying to control if you're playing the control deck. But generally speaking, like, I think once you're at the point where, like, if you have enough fodder to like deal with someone's board and like just keep creatures out of play, you should just be turning everything sideways every turn. We talked about it in that last game, and I just know that's
Absolutely.
when we like talked about, like, it was a big point of conversation afterwards. And yeah, there may be decks where like you never really get to feel comfortable, so you do it more slowly. But there may be decks where you just like if you deal with a Dargo like 2 or 3 times with Aoness Urchin, like, that Dargo deck's probably going to be hurting pretty bad, so you can start taking care of them, or just leave them alone because you have them locked down for forever and start dealing with other people. Just because Dargo needs that kind of permanent mass of stuff to get Dargo back in play.
So you need to learn the format, pretty much, is kind of what you're saying, kind of what you're getting at. You need to truly learn the format, and that is what control is, right? You said it yourself. Like, you need to know what you're controlling, right? Easy way to put it, in a sense. David, you agree, or?
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely a deck that benefits from knowing everything in the format, knowing when you can afford to play conservatively and when you should really be using your resources aggressively to get people off the table. And that's a hard thing to learn. I should note, Bobby won that game that we were talking about because I was not aggressive enough and I didn't turn the corner when I should have.
Got it.
But yeah, it's something that game to game it is really going to depend. Um, I yeah, it takes a lot of reps to learn and feel comfortable with a deck like this. And even still, like I've played this deck probably more than anybody, and there's still times like this game that I had with Bobby where like I made some wrong decisions and it slipped away from me. So it's a tough deck. It's a tough deck to pick up, and I definitely recommend um, getting in a lot of practice and against a lot of different decks too, and knowing everything that you can about the format and what you're going to be expecting.
Yeah.
And I want to like, I think that's important across any control deck. Like,
Mhm.
eh, you know, we've talked about, understanding how people win, understanding when people are threatening based on what's in play, what they, is in their hand, or, the actions they're taking. Like being able to like pick up on all these like kind of little things and add them together and put together a picture of, okay, this person is mildly threatening, this person is irrelevant, this person's like, I am worried about them going off at any moment. Like being able to pick apart those different like pieces of information and put them together, like control just has to know it. Like every other deck, obviously, no matter what you're playing, it benefits you to know what other people are doing and how they win. But when you're talking like a combo deck, like they're not as worried about like what other people are doing so much as protecting themselves a lot of the time. You know, aggro's can sometimes just be like brute force. I don't care what you're doing. I'm just gonna swing at you anyway. Like, control doesn't necessarily get that same luxury. They like have to be fairly, you're trying to control 3 other people and the whole game, and so you're outnumbered like from the jump. You're an uphill
Yes.
battle from the jump, and so just Aoness Urchin's great because everything it's doing is a multiple for 1, so it's has that built-in like, okay, every one of my cards can deal with something for each person almost or close to it. So it's not just, we talk about Doomblade, and I'm sure we'll talk more about kind of 1-for-1s later, where they don't feel as bad because you're only impacting one person. So.
Exactly. Well, with that, let's kind of move on to the next deck, and let me move it over to Mr. Curiosity himself, although I think somebody might argue with that a little bit here. Dallas, bro, take us over.
I mean, yeah, we got 2 lovers of curiosity in this call, at least here. But
I'm the only one who stopped with it. I'm coughing.
bro, you've never played Malcolm Breaches in your life.
Malcolm Kennis.
Very different from Malcolm Kennis. Malcolm Breaches is a control deck that actually has to try. So this is a curiosity control deck. So if you're unfamiliar with curiosity, basically what curiosity does, while curiosity itself is not in the format, we have 3 lookalikes. Sorry, 2 lookalikes. We have
2 in blue red.
Yeah.
2 in blue.
We have 3 if you count green, but so we have Ophidian Eye and Tandem Lookout, which both read whenever the creature that is enchanted or soul bonded deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Notable that it is damage and not combat damage, so we're looking to put one of these effects into play and use a creature that deals 1 damage to each opponent to repeatedly draw cards and get card advantage through that manner. And eventually we win the game by turning them into pirates and having Malcolm out and drawing cards and making mana. So all of our cantrips, all of our 1, 2, or 3 mana removal, anything of that nature is going to be netting us cards and mana. And if we have breaches out, we net cards off of other people as well. And you just get to a point where you draw through and find an actual infinite. Or, if it's a grindy game, as some control games turn out to be, you can just kind of drain people out with this kind of loop and just get there without comboing, which is pretty neat.
Well, I think a big distinction between the two decks, if I could throw that out there at you guys here real quick, is that Aoness Street is a combo-less control deck, and Malcolm Breaches is a combo finishing control deck. Now, that's not saying it's your, on the to-do list every game with Malcolm Breaches, but it does attempt to finish the game with a combo finish. That's relatively true
Yeah.
with the deck?
Typically, we want to end the game with combo. And, we are still playing a Malcolm red deck. Like, we can win turn 3, turn 4, if we get the absolute nuts hand. But that is by no means our goal with the deck. We're looking to just control the table, get value with our curiosity and pingers, and our large suite of removal, and play the long game. But we still have the opportunity to win quickly.
Yeah, it's never, when you talk to Malcolm Kedis or some of the other red Malcolm, they're trying to always combo ASAP. They're searching more than Malcolm Breaches is usually trying to do, and really doing anything to find those combo pieces. And Puzzle and I think David's played Malcolm Breaches too. I know you've played Malcolm Kedis, Chris. They're all probably 80 of the cards are probably the same list to list. A lot of it comes down to how you're playing the game as opposed to the cards in the deck. So I mean, yeah, it's like a control the game first, combo when it happens. You can there's a point in the game, kind of the the turning the corner where you'll see, okay, this is where I need to combo or should combo. This is my opening, and you go for it then, as opposed to just trying to force it early and often.
Well, like a big thing with a deck like this, right? And so this deck specifically uses stack control. So because it's blue, right, you inherently get your counter spells. So, David kind of alluded to this earlier, and I very firmly agree with it. You shouldn't be using Doomblade, right? One for oneing stuff. So, but your deck does. And I think the big key difference between your deck is you're kind of just using them to either protect yourself, or maybe I'm wrong, you're using them to stop other people from winning, then so you can win the game. How are you guys using those one for ones to where other decks Airness is just 1 for 3 everything else, right? So
I view them you're using removal to stop people from winning or to stop them from getting too threatening. You're a lightning bolt is never going to win you the game, but it could very easily stop someone from winning.
It can.
It can, yeah. So you're using the one for ones to stop people from winning, or say you're going for the win to protect your win. You're very reactive deck. You're reacting to what other people are doing. The thing that's cool about this deck, we talk about how Doomblade's a 1-for-1 typically. When we have our pingers out, or all of our 1-for-1s are not quite 1-for-1s anymore. The adding the extra damage to each opponent, off of every spell cast, that makes it more than just a 1-for-1. Maybe it's not quite a 2-for-1, but it's it's above a 1-for-1 at that point. You staple, an Ophidian on a pinger, well then it's an Abillion for one, it feels like. You make a pinger a pirate with a Breaches or a Malcolm in play. You're getting mana, you're getting opponent's cards. So all of our 1-for-1s have the ability to turn to so much more than a 1-for-1 in this deck. They're not always, but more often than not, you'll have some type of pinger or way to make it more than just what the spell says.
I mean, I think Dallas, you're here with me on this one. I don't know how many times me and you have said that this card needs to be seeing more play, but I love the inclusion here of heated debate, right? I don't know how many times we have spoken about this card. In a control deck, something that I've said in the past is if you're playing control, you need the card to be doing what it's supposed to be doing when you want it to do, right? I'll pay the extra mana for it, or 2 mana in comparison to like Flame Slash, right? As long as it gets the job done when I need it to get the job done, right? And yeah, go for it. Go for it.
The nice thing about Aoness Street Urchin being permanent based removal is that it doesn't use the stack, right? So you actively just play around counter spells as soon as you've resolved Aoness and your background. Like, you don't have to worry about your removal getting countered, which is really nice. In this deck, we have to. So having access to a card like Heated Debate to make sure we can beat those blue decks whenever they put down their Peregrine Drake or whatnot, and just blow them out whenever they think they're backed up by 3-4 counter spells, and they just still lose, is an absurdly powerful blowout.
Yep. Completely agree. Completely agree. So, with that, do you guys have anything else to say about Malcolm Breachers, or are we good to have one little off little bit here, real quick?
I mean, I do like we talked about Malcolm Red in general, right? Like, I do want to point like Breaches is more. It is the slower version of the deck. It can be just as fast, with the right hand or whatever. So I talked earlier, like most of the cards are the same in these decks. Like they're all playing, Reckless Fireweaver. They're all playing Counterspell. They're all playing Lightning Bolt. Like blue-red is playing blue-red cards. Like all these decks are playing good blue-red cards. A lot of it comes down to play style, I think, and like how you're approaching the game. And I think one thing to note, I've played different Malcolm lists. I'm sure everyone here has played different Malcolm lists. Knowing that going in that, hey, I'm aiming for the long game. I'm not trying to find my all 3 pieces from the jump. Is really important when picking up this deck. I've seen people pick it up and like want to treat it as the combo first list, and it's like it's not going to reward you that like for playing that way. And you might get frustrated for that because that's not what the deck is trying to do. So being mindful of that when you're like looking at this, they play a lot of the cards that are the same and there's some overlap, but knowing why those differences are there, even though they're minor differences and like the commanders are slightly different, is really huge and greatly impacts how gameplay happens, in my opinion.
Yep. I mean, I completely agree. But let's move on. So I would like to throw a little honorable mention out there for you guys. I know David has some pretty good thoughts about this deck, and I also know Bobby has some pretty good thoughts about this deck. I'm just gonna ignore Puzzle currently with that statement, and just throw out there Floodgate. So this really isn't on the roster of what we're talking about today, but I do think this is a very good honorable mention. And David, if you want to kind of throw 2 cents out there at it, because I know you have some pretty good feelings about it, and I know Bobby, you played in an event, so we already know you have good feelings about it. So
Yeah, it's as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like there aren't many repeatable sources of card advantage in the format for the blue decks to run on. Like the best ones, like Ristic and Mystic Remora, they're banned. Don't get access to those. Floodgate has a ton of different ways to get repeatable card advantage. It's got every Ophidian in the format, basically. Its commander is a repeatable sweeper that can take out multiple creatures multiple times during the game. And like it backs that up with a combo finish. It's looking to assemble some Drake lines. And I don't know, I think there's a lot going on with the deck that I enjoy. And maybe it's not the most popular opinion in this call exactly, but I think there's a lot to the deck, and I've played a few games with it. I would like to toss it to Bobby because he's actually designed it and played it a lot more than I have. I think that having access to so many ways to repeatedly draw cards, to find your interaction, to find your combo pieces, there's got to be something there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a fan. I know Puzzle and I have our differences. For as much as we're aligned on a lot of things, we probably will never be aligned on this, and that's fine. But yeah, like, you know,
I rated it higher on the tier list. Puff, cough. Higher on the tier list.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'll ramble after this.
But you know, David said at the beginning, one of the things that's different about PDH as compared to EDH, we don't have wraths really. You know, we have a few pyroclasm-like effects, and even Floodgate's still like one of those. You know, it's not outright killing things; it's dealing damage to a limited number of things. You know, it's not interacting with blue creatures. You know, I know Puzzle likes to harp on that as like, oh, that means it's bad, blah blah blah. No, but it's very powerful, you know, for that effect because it's not something we have in the format. The Ophidians are a very like, you know, they don't go in many decks because they're weird, they're kind of clunky, but they fit perfectly in that deck and they draw you so many cards, you know, and like in ways that, you know, we don't really have access to in this format anymore with Mystic and Ristic Band, like David mentioned. Plus, it's blue. You know, you still get to run counter spells. You get to run bounce. You get to run, you know, graveyard hate in the form of artifacts. You get to run all the best cards blue has to offer still. You lose out on some more of the hard removal. So, like, you know, there are some blue creatures that can be a little more difficult to deal with. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have game against those because it still gets to run, you know, all the other good bounce and counter spells.
Okay. Floodgate is not that bad. Like, I think Floodgate is still good.
Like, opening statement. I love it.
Not hitting blue creatures is problematic in a meta where Malcolm is good. Yes, that is very true.
And Gretchen.
And Gretchen. It doesn't matter as much against Gretchen because, like, you're still killing all the untappers.
Gretchen,
but
yeah.
The thing is that a lot of the really good decks in the format, or decks that, you know, Chris and I think are very good, Gretchen, Abdel, Malcolm, all just are able to play through Floodgate. So I think Floodgate is really good at shutting down a lot of pretty good decks, but it struggles against some of the best decks in the format. So I struggle to call it like a really good deck. But obviously, a board wipe in the command zone is very strong. It just has to play so slow because you have like almost no redundancy and for your combo pieces, and they can be difficult to find in mono blue, and you really have to protect your win. So it's difficult sometimes. But yeah, I think the deck still has legs. I just don't think it's outstanding.
Yeah, against those decks, you know, it's trying to slow the game down and slow them down from winning. You know, some of the Malcolm decks are trying to win turn 3. I mean, all Malcolm decks would love to win turn 3 and turn 4. But you know, it's slowing those down. Yeah, it is hard to find the combo. I'll be the first to. I will not. You know, hype it up as like a turn 4 combo deck. That just is not how that deck works at all. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I need to play it more against decks. I want to play it more. People probably don't want to play against it more. So that has been one thing that like dissuades me from doing it. But yeah, I mean, I think we all at least somewhat agree. Like there is something there. What it is probably still has a lot to be seen.
Viral Drake for a little bit. Like Floodgate's better than Viral Drake. So you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying there, Puzzle. Like, you know, we had that talk, and like that is also the way I do feel. I do like the deck quite a bit. I actually think the deck is sauce. I honestly think I could just take this deck and just go punish every other deck in the format horrendously. But then if I end up going to an event and then I sit down across from the decks that you guys named, I'm gonna be like, oh no, okay, we're like. Who's the one playing? Okay, this is what's I got going on and whatnot. So is it a good deck? yes, I think the deck is good.
It forces
Will it
people to
struggle?
play differently for sure. Like you have
Yeah,
to
exactly.
respect it.
Oh, you have to, but 110%. But with that, let's kind of move on to our last deck of the day and kind of like where we're going to be kind of rounding the corner, turning the corner. Yeah, see what I did there, you guys? And showing certain things that we've kind of already been discussing and show certain aspects about this deck and why we feel the way we do. And let's move on to Carter Doomscourge. So if you guys don't mind, you mind if I kind of take this one away a little bit?
Go for it.
Absolutely.
So the first thing I have a pretty strong feeling about a list like this specifically is that the curve is high, which I don't find to be an inherent problem. But actually, you know what? Let me not even go there, you guys. Let me just throw the whole thing out there just from the beginning. And my biggest problem with a list like this overall. And see what you guys think, and we can kind of go from there. This style of list, even though it's a control deck, it's dependent on its opponents, right? And I think because of that huge aspect, right? If we have a deck like Aoness, it could do the deed and win the game irrelevant of what it's playing against, right? And the same thing with Malcolm Breaches. But this deck is depending on its opponents to be able to win the game. Uh, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Um, I'll go ahead and start. Um, so obviously we don't have removal in the command zone like we do with Aoness or Street Urchin. We don't have card advantage or ramp like we do with the other. We have a mechanism to encourage our opponents to not attack us and attack each other. So a lot of this, what this deck does is try to find initiative in Monarch and then accrue advantage from those passively while forcing our opponents to never interact with us through combat. But like you're saying, we're talking about combat, and there are a lot of decks in the format that are combo, and they don't really care if the creatures are goaded. Now, to be fair, this does still mess with some combo decks by forcing combo pieces to attack. For instance, Tandem Lookout. We don't want to attack with that ever. So being forced to attack with it sucks. But for a lot of decks, they can just tap down their combo pieces through their own tap abilities or things of that nature. Not to mention everybody is swinging, so a lot of the people we're swinging at can be tapped down if we're getting goaded repeatedly. So that can be a struggle.
Yeah. Well, let me. That was actually a perfect explanation for that. Let me swap to something real quick, you guys. I'm gonna be a little all over the place with this one because I got some pretty good thoughts, and I kind of want to ask you guys your opinions, and I kind of want to point over at David, and I really want to know your thoughts because since you're the Airness Street Urchin guy, and you took a deck that is red and green, a deck that has no quote unquote value to many people, and made it have these like these one the quarters, and these thirds and all these like weird fractions, and we're able to create this card advantage engine. This deck has 14 1-for-1s, which in a deck like yours, that comparison rate wouldn't apply. Like, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, um, the one for ones are really rough in multiplayer, and I think I will say I do think a number of them are necessary. Like, we'll have to at some point just be able to point at something and be like, "No, you need to go away." I,
Mhm.
one of the things while there are a lot of one for ones, and I would personally probably fewer of them, I do want to note that the deck also does get access to and runs basically every sweeper that it possibly can, even including something like Bloodfire Infusion. You sacrifice a creature and let that creature deal its power to everything else. So
Yeah.
while it does have, it is a sick card. So while it does have a lot of targeted removal, and as I mentioned before, it loses some card advantage that way. There are there's sulfurous blast, there's pestilence, there's fiery cannonades, everything you can think of. The swirling sandstorm, drown in sorrow, it's running them. Back a little bit of card advantage that way. I definitely understand your point on 14 is a lot of 1-for-1s, and I think there are probably some adjustments in tweaks in numbers that I would make if it were my deck.
One thing too, I want to chime in and add. So Carter is a really interesting commander because I don't know, playing it wants other people to have creatures. Like it's by goading and making everyone attack, it wants everyone else to kind of take care of everyone else and then just kind of like play cleanup at the end. So it's got this weird spot where it still needs to keep everyone in check creature wise because it can't overcome a giant mass of creatures at the end, while it still needs everyone to have some semblance of a board. So it's like in this weird spot where it like needs to like deal with everything while only needing to deal with some things. So you get this like weird mesh of like, we talked, there's 14, 15 1-for-1s, 8 to 10 board wipes or whatever, like, but then it's kind of lacking in closing power. Like it's relying on everyone else to close the game out on the other players and just hoping it has enough to kind of get over on that last person standing.
You actually brought up exactly what I was about to ask you, so I appreciate you doing that. So that was I was going to ask you about what do you think about cards that are, I mean, I don't have any words anymore. You did it. Like that's it. You did it. Like
I mean,
you
it's
got me.
weird.
You have me tongue tied. So yeah,
it's weird. Like it's weird. Like the deck. I don't know. I would struggle to build this deck. I think because because of Carter's ability, you want some number of 1-for-1s, but you don't want too many. You want some number of, things that deal with multiple things, but also not too many. And I think it ends up trying to run too much of both of them, and not. It's more focused on dealing with things as opposed to ending the game at a certain point. It views that as like the secondary kind of, it's like, hey, I need to stop everyone, and I'll just figure out how to win maybe at some point.
Yep.
And I think it should probably focus more on the figuring out how it wants to win first, and then
go from there.
Figuring out what it needs to run based on that. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Exactly. Like exactly it. Like you did a good job. I appreciate you reading my mind. Definitely will have you on the show more often, man. I appreciate that. But Puzzle, my bro, hit me with it. What are your kind of thoughts? Like something. My question for you, since I'm able to ask you, you don't read my mind as well, so I don't know about this one, but a lot of these cards like Not Dead After All, Village Rites, and stuff like that. These are the 1-mana cards in this deck, right? And there's quite a bit. But the problem with these 1-mana cards that I'm seeing is that with our curve being at 4 with our creatures, like Thorn, Stirring Bard, Slum Reaper, Vicious Battle Rager, things of that nature, and our commander, right? Because we're kind of using those cards for our commander. Those cards aren't 1 mana. Those cards are 5 mana, right? So those aren't 1 mana. So the curve of this deck is incredibly high. And I know you've been fantastic about doing this with turns and how the format has been developing. What are your thoughts on with turns getting lower and a deck like this trying to start its game plan by turn 6, maybe turn 5 with the Mana Rock.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bobby kind of said it best in the fact that this deck is just so overly focused on stopping everyone else as its main game plan and really not trying to actually win the game until it has just absolutely drained the life out of everyone else, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
like our cheapest creature is 2 mana, and that's a removal creature that we're never swinging with. Our 3 drops are more removal. Um, like, we're not putting any creature into play that proactively does anything until at least 4 mana. And even then, like, we're just not on many creatures currently in general, which is kind of the way that I would like to see this list start to lean more so. I'd like to see it take advantage of the goad from Carter removing blockers and using that as a mechanism to actually end the game rather than playing just an absurd amount of 1-for-1 removal pieces. Just play some more value creatures.
Let me interrupt you here real quick, Puzzle. So, my apologies for that, but I have to throw this out there. We did forget to say why we're using this deck. So first off, we might not know anything, right? Because this is the list that is actually putting up results right now on the database itself. So we might not know anything. But even with that said, there is another list out there actually starting to put up results that is an aggro variant, which is kind of what Puzzle was alluding to just now, that is using like a rat plan and being an aggro version of Cardor. So we'll see how that develops in the future. But I just wanted to throw that out there. So continue.
Yeah, I think the game plan is very slow on this deck right now, and I would argue that while the commander, it kind of looks like it leans towards control. I understand where it's coming from, like forcing your opponents to just beat each other up for you, and then closing the game out from there. But I think it does, funnily enough, work better as an aggro commander. So part of it is even just like the commander choice and trying to figure out which way you want to gear your deck. Kind of like what Bobby was saying with Malcolm, right? Like Malcolm specifically, you get to play actual different commanders for the different game plans, but a lot of decks can be built as different archetypes if you change just a few cards and change your mindset as to how you're using those abilities.
Yeah, I think Carter, when you look at Carter from like a control perspective and trying to do with this, like I already talked about, it's like it has like conflicting interests with what it wants to do, and if it's not capitalizing on what other people are doing by attacking, what are you doing? Like I think it's gonna be really good at getting second place a lot, and then losing to that last player who managed to take out everyone else. I think what you guys are saying, like a more aggro, I think it should lean into kind of like the Rakdos scam kind of game plan where it's like, all right, I'm gonna get Carter out when boards are built up. I'm gonna like build up my board in the meantime, if that's rat colonies or whatever that is, and then like lean hard into I'm sacrificing Carter every turn, I'm reanimating Carter every turn, and I'm getting that trigger every turn. So for the rest of the game, nobody gets to attack on their terms. Everyone's doing combat my way, and then I have enough of a presence with the combined pressure of everyone else. Then you're picking up the pieces along the way, as opposed to waiting for that all to unfold and then you making that jump into ending the game.
You're trying to win the game, right? That's the goal. So
me personally, that's what I like to do. I don't know about other people, but I like winning. So
obviously, I don't know if any of you guys have played this deck, but I have never played this deck. I've only seen it a couple times. So obviously, this is all speculation.
I have played this deck actually, and I have played against this deck with friends of mine piloting it. So I know how this deck plays. I find this deck to be incredibly frustrating to play against because you sit across from it, and unless the deck I found to be able to beat it the easiest was Dargo and Kedis, because I just blitz it and thrash right through it in the first 3 turns of the game. And I go, get off the table. I don't want you here. Okay, good. Now let's all play a game, because you're just going to drag the game out to an indefinite amount of time. And that's kind of how I treated it when I was testing against it. But if they have the stuff out, or they had the removal, now we're dragged out to a 2.5, 3 hour game anyways. So kind of
That
was one of those things.
that leads to one other point I thought we should touch on with this list specifically too. You talk about Dargo Kedis. That is actually a deck that sometimes doesn't care who it's attacking because it's attacking everyone with both commanders in play.
Mm-hmm.
This, because it's making everyone else attack like against their will, it could accidentally screw things up for it and mess things up in ways that it doesn't want to, which can kind of have negative unintended consequences. Sometimes you want people to have a creature stick around. Sometimes you want things to not be attacking and dying, and by goading everything and everyone, like, you're kind of put in a tough spot. And so that's when it has to rely on its removal, and that's when it gets wishy-washy about what it wants to do. And I think it just makes for a bad plan.
So let me touch one more thing about it, because you're kind of bringing up something I wanted to talk about, and you made me remember about a specific card in this list I want to talk about, and I'm just using this as an example point, and I kind of want your guys' thoughts, and then we can kind of wrap this up. And my my biggest thing is with the way the format has developed, right? Some of the best decks of the format, like aggro wise, right? And you just said it, like Dargo Kedis. I'm not saying that's one of the best decks, but like you were talking about, Dargo Kedis, right, is able to do that thing. Well, one of its partners in crime is Loyal Subordinate. That's a zombie tribal deck, right? And then there's a lot of vampires in the format overall. Just vampires. There's a whole lot of them. Falconwrath Noble and Bloodseeker. We have some pretty good vampires in this format. And a card that sticks out to me in this deck that is just the biggest sore's thumb I've seen is Victim of the Night. In a control deck, I want Heated Debate, right? Not Victim of the Night. What do you, I mean, David, I don't know if you want to just take us off, or we could go down the line and like hear what you guys have to think about something like that. I want to hear your thoughts on, as the control players, what did you want to have a card that you know is going to do the deed for you, rather than like, well, this is good, kinda, sometimes, right?
Well, the short answer is yes. I do agree. I'm a believer in heated debate as well. I think being able to know that it's going to resolve is such a huge thing. Um, I I I agree with you. I think that finding a spot for heated debate, whether it's over Victim of Night or something else, that is one targeted removal spell that I would like to see this deck play for sure.
Especially a slower deck. Like, this deck's already wanting to spend a bunch of mana on spells. Like, it runs plenty of rocks. I'm not necessarily as low on Victim of Night as maybe you are, but yeah, there's just like, you get to a point, you're in red and black, which the combination of those two have the best hard removal, if not almost all of the hard removal in the format. Yeah, you want your spells to be able to kill things when they need to kill them. We have a fairly good chunk of spells that can accomplish that. Part of this, I think, just goes to reducing the overall 1-for-1 removal. Once you get to a certain point, you have to add more of this you know dependent on what people are playing. You have to play stuff that only kills non-black creatures. You have to kill cast down only kills non-legendaries. There's a chunk of removal that's just generically, this kills everything, or this deals enough damage to anything. In red and black, you probably want to run a combination of damage and kill spells to get around, random protection effects and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's just kind of a sign that, hey, maybe I don't need as much removal if I'm getting into these ones that are questionable at times.
Personally, I think Victim of Night is a pretty solid card, actually. Not many people play Falconwrath Noble. I don't think that's a big card to bring up in our format currently, as it stands with the meta. I think this card is great against our 3 top decks. Like, it hits basically everything.
I hope you don't say Malcolm,
Um,
because
yeah, like, it's annoying against Malcolm on combo turns, but you just respond by killing it before it's a changeling. Like, that's not a real argument. The problems for me with this card are the double pips, which is pretty annoying for a control deck. Sometimes, depending on what it is and what it's not. Not being truly unconditional is problematic, I agree. I do think, obviously, control decks probably prefer to play removal that will always work over this questionable removal at times. But in general, I actually think Victim of Night is a pretty solid card. I have trouble keeping it in my list, but I do have it in my package of staples. I think this card's pretty solid.
yeah, I mean, I just feel like in the past 3 sets we've gotten cards that just outclass it. I mean, we have cards like Final Flourish and Candy Grapple, and a few of those newer cards just kind of. I've been very high, I guess you could say, on these new effects that just like -6, -6, and -5 creatures, because I want to make sure I get the deed done, even though I understand that, you know, maybe something maybe larger than that in the format, but if it could kill a Dargo, I'm feeling pretty good about cards like that. So.
Dargo Kelith is gonna ruin your day one of these days, man.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. I'll be the first one to get just shot off the table. I get it. But with that, guys, you guys got anything else for us, or?
Good. Anything from you, David or Bobby?
I'm
Playing the
good.
Sanctuary events.
Yeah,
Yes.
play it, sure.
Playing the
Play in
Sanctuary
those events.
Be there
And
for sure.
I just wanted to say thank you guys for being here with us today. I really appreciate it. This was an absolutely fantastic time with you guys, always, and you guys are always welcome to be here with us. So thank you again for being here with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's always
Thanks
a
for
fun
having
time.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and close this out then. Make sure to check the links in the description below to find all of David and Bobby's content, the Sanctuary, all that fun stuff. I'll also make sure to leave links to these deck lists if you want to check them out. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe while you're down there. Leave a comment. Let us know if you're a control player, what you think about these decks, or tell us what control deck you're playing of your own. You know, maybe you play Floodgate or something. I don't know. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.